Good afternoon, Broncos, student athletes, coaches, staff, and distinguished panel. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many of you today. We will continue to support you through these challenging times and remain resolute and committed to preparing for when we can all safely return to Cal Poly Pomona and resume practice and competition. However, today we're excited to introduce you to our Racial Equity Subcommittee Working Group, who formed to address and educate us on racial unrest that has been occurring in our country. The committee, which will be expanding soon to include student athletes, will be creating workshops for our Broncos family to help us in our growth and education regarding racial equity and other related topics. Additionally, the ability to foster an inclusive environment that will provide opportunities for growth and change in our department, campus, community will benefit us moving forward. Moderating today's systematic racism session is Darrell Smith, assistant track and field coach. Darrell has been a leader in forming the committee and developing our working agenda. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Darrell, who will introduce the panel and format today's town hall panel department dialogue. Darrell, the screen is yours. Thank you and the committee's work in leading this dialogue.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Welcome to our student athletes, athletic department staff, and town hall panelists. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. 2020 has presented us with some unique challenges that have required some unique solutions. Those solutions will not be short, but we're working towards solutions regardless as we approach all problems. While we have all been dealing with the fallout of the pandemic, we were hit with the George Floyd death at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department and the subsequent protests, civil unrest, and conversation about racial equity in this country. Most of us, if not all of us, felt the impact during the month of protests that flooded our lives. It created what has now become known as the uncomfortable conversation. We have not been immune to these issues as a department. We've had a number of uncomfortable talks amongst ourselves, and one of the resulting solutions was the creation of the Racial Equity Subcommittee. As a part of our charge as a committee, we decided that the key component of resolution is education. With the guidance of Brian, we have set up monthly workshops to help spread information to our student athletes on various topics such as voting, activism, campus initiatives, etc. We'll share more topics as after this meeting. You'll see a game plan, a monthly game plan that will outline what each workshop will be every month. As a committee, we felt it was important to start this journey with a town hall that would allow you guys, student athletes, to have a conversation about the very uncomfortable conversation about race relations and the history of racism in this country and how it applies to all of us as CPP. We put together a fantastic panel today from the campus community to help us answer some of your questions and concerns. We might not get to all of them, but we hope that the conversation will cover most of the questions that you have submitted. I would like to introduce our panel and get this conversation started. You will see a Q&A option on your screen at the bottom. As the conversation goes on, feel free to submit your questions. We cannot guarantee that all questions will be asked, but we do hope that all of your questions will be answered. We'll go through some specific questions after the panel discussion. So let's get started. We have 4 prominent members of our campus community joining us, all of which hope to get to know you during their time here at Cal Poly Pomona. Agreeing to join us are Ms. Nicole Butts, the Presidential Associate for Inclusive Excellence and Diversity and a member of President Coley's cabinet. Say hello for us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome, welcome. We also have the leader of our police force, Chief Dario Robinson, who is an alumnus of CPP and the track team and has a son currently on the track team.
Hello there, Broncos. Thanks for having me on the panel. Look forward to speaking to all of you.
Joining us as the chair of the Chemistry and Biochemistry Department is Dr. Michael Page, as well as the chair of the Black Faculty and Staff Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. If I haven't met you in class because you haven't had the joy to take chemistry, that's okay. But you can stop by, talk to me at some point, and send an email. I look forward to engaging with you more down the road.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Page. Last but not least, we have Associate Head Coach from men's basketball, Coach Damion Hill.
Hello, everybody. Glad we were able to do this and get everybody together. So look forward to having a meaningful conversation with you guys.
Thanks, D. So let's jump right into it, guys. First up, I'll start with Nicole. Just kind of right up your alley, under your umbrella of your actual job. So before we get into anything specific, Ms. Butts, if you can help us out and kind of define as best you can in our time allotted what systematic racism is.
Absolutely. You might need to remind me about how much time I have because I can talk about this issue for a long time. So stop me when I go over.
I got you covered.
Thank you. Systemic racism is the idea that there are policies, procedures, laws built into our existing structures and institutions that create different outcomes for people of color, specifically African Americans. So a lot of this goes back to our history and Jim Crow laws, segregation laws, and those things have continued throughout our history. So it's those things that are built in, or I say baked into the cake of our structures and our systems that create inequitable or unequitable outcomes for African Americans specifically. One of the things that and if you've ever heard me talk about this before, one of the examples I often use is the idea of SAT tests. And I usually start with that because we are in higher education, right? So the SAT test and the need to take an SAT test is a perfect example of institutional or structural racism, because we've known for decades that the SAT test has, the people of color from different socioeconomic backgrounds do not do as well on the SAT, not because of any intellectual issues, but because of cultural issues, because of exposure issues, because maybe they don't have the same ability to take SAT prep classes that people from other socioeconomic backgrounds do. So we've known for decades that the SAT is a barrier for people of color entering college. We've also known that the SAT is not a predictor of success in college, yet it's persisted. We've still required it. So it has created a barrier or limitation for individuals being able to access higher education, which we know tends to be a way to increase one's financial mobility. So that's one of the examples of institutional racism, but I want to give you a couple more examples. One, and let me say this too, before I give you some of the other examples. You know, people talk about the system being broken. The system isn't broken. The system is working the exact way the system was set up to work. And that was to create barriers for people of color. So the system is doing exactly what it was intended to do. So some other examples of that, criminal justice system, right? When we think about the way crack cocaine, for instance, the amount of time people spent in jail because of crack cocaine sales versus the amount of time people spent in jail for selling pure cocaine is significantly different. You got so much more time for selling crack cocaine. And again, it's against the law, but understand that when you look at the criminal justice system, those things that people of color engaged in had much higher penalties than those things that non-African Americans or whites engaged in. So pure cocaine was something that whites engaged in. They didn't get the same amount of time, if time at all, but crack cocaine did. So that's an example of systemic racism. Another example is the way our highways are built. And I actually dropped in the chat, I'm hoping someone can share it with the community. And it's a link to an article around the Los Angeles highway systems. And the way the Los Angeles highway systems were built is a perfect example too of systemic racism. So the highways, when they were built, cut through very affluent African American communities and mixed race communities. There's an area in Los Angeles that was known as Sugar Hill. It's in what's called the West Adams area now. it was a very affluent African-American community. The 10 freeway cut right through that community. It cut through Boyle Heights, which at the time was a very mixed environment. It was a mixed neighborhood. So you had Blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, lots of different people. It cut right through Boyle Heights. There was also a stipulation in the way that the highways were built that said you needed to preserve green space. So parks, recreational areas. They cut through green spaces in Black areas and mixed areas and deliberately did not cut through green spaces in Pasadena. Didn't even cut through South Pasadena at all. Didn't cut through Beverly Hills. So when you look at the way the system, the highway system was created here, it destroyed African-American communities and green spaces while preserving white areas and green spaces in white areas. And there's lots of articles on this, but I did ask them to drop one in particular in the chat for you to take a look at. Another, and this will be my last example because I think I'm kind of running out of time. The other example is the GI Bill. So veterans, after coming back from the war, had access to a GI Bill. And the GI Bill allowed them to have tuition paid for college, as well as give them loans for housing. Well, what happened was people would come back, veterans, Black veterans and white veterans would come back. The Black veterans could not take advantage of the GI Bill in two different ways. One, in terms of that tuition, Blacks were restricted at the time from many colleges. So they could not go to those colleges and take advantage of the GI Bill tuition. Where they were able to take advantage of it in some cases were places like barber school, right? So they were able to take up some trades, but they were not able to utilize those funds for a college education. The other place where it came into play is in housing loans. The GI Bill allowed or insured housing loans for veterans. However, if you were Black, you didn't have the same access because the law was written in such a way that it excluded loans in Black neighborhoods. So you could not use the GI Bill to buy a home in a Black neighborhood. And at the same time, Blacks were excluded from white neighborhoods. So you've heard people talk about redlining, for instance. That's a very real thing. The green line identified white neighborhoods where they would actually insure those GI loans. The red line indicated those Black neighborhoods that they would not insure those loans. So of the 67,000 GI loans that they gave for housing, fewer than 100 went to African Americans or Blacks. 67,000 GI loans, fewer than 100 went to Blacks. And we still see the impact of the redlining and greenlining when we look at the suburbs today. So that correlation still exists even to this day. So you're talking about headwinds and tailwinds for people, right? So that GI loan was able to help white Americans further their education and purchase homes, which we know is the best way to build equity and give your family a head start. However, it created headwinds, so people had to push against it if you're African American because you didn't have that same tailwind that was created by higher education or home loans. So decades later, you have white wealth that exceeds Black wealth tremendously, primarily because of home ownership that Blacks were restricted from. So those are some examples of systemic racism and how they still come into play today. Did I exceed my time?
Oh, no, you're perfectly fine. You've got
Great.
it for
Cool.
8 minutes. Anybody else like to join in while we're on this topic? I have plenty of questions. So, Dr. Butts, go ahead, Damion.
Sorry, I'm not a doctor yet, so no, just Ms. Butts.
Sorry, Ms. Butts. Damion, go ahead.
Yeah, I think another example of systemic racism related to everybody, it's like, say we're both swimming, and what it is for somebody of color is like you're swimming upstream, and the way the system is built for white people now is you're swimming with the stream. Mm-hmm. Is the way I kind of see it. Is like we're always battling going upstream with everything. Well, I thing, but with many things, whether it's education and like Mrs. Butts said, with the prison system. So where there's always fighting upstream. And the biggest thing is to try to recognize that when that stuff is happening, and then try to get it to the point where we all can swim upstream and have the same opportunities.
Yeah. And, you know, to piggyback on that, and I like that analogy, right? Swimming upstream and swimming downstream, or swimming with the stream or against the stream. And it's similar to that idea of headwinds and tailwinds, right? So if you've ever flown across country, when you're going to New York or East Coast, you actually have tailwinds. So the plane actually goes faster and you get to the East Coast faster than when you're going from the East Coast to the West Coast when you have headwinds. So when you have headwinds, you're going against that. And even any of you, well, you guys are all athletes. So, you know, the notion of running, right? You actually, when you're running behind someone else, they kind of pull you along, right? We see the same thing in bicycling. You can kind of get in that person's wind and they pull you along. But when you're going against the wind, then, you know, you got to fight harder. You're struggling. You're pushing so much harder than the person who has those tailwinds that are pushing them along. And then you kind of look at the person who's struggling going, why is it so hard for you? This is easy for me. Well, I'm going against the wind. You're going with the wind, right? So we then start to judge one another too, based on what we see, what we perceive as, well, you're just not working hard enough. When in fact, I'm working twice as hard as you because I got to go, like you said, I'm swimming against the stream.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a good segue. Dr. Page, I got that one right. In light of, Ms. Butts, thank you for that thorough explanation. I knew you could go on for the whole hour about it. So I appreciate that briefness of it. But we'll segue to Dr. Page on this. As a member of the faculty, chair of a department and head of mentorship, how has the staff on campus worked to ensure or combat systemic racism?
So I guess I'll ask that you all do me a favor and take a look at Percy Julian. If you could Google him, he's one of my personal heroes. He's an African-American chemist who attended Harvard and could not get his PhD from Harvard because he was not able to get assigned a teaching assistant position as a graduate student to be able to teach a class. That was one of the requirements to get your PhD. So he had to leave and go to Europe. And then when he came to them, went to join the American Chemical Society, it said, you know, in the 60s, during the Civil Rights era or movement at that time, African-American chemists aren't permitted to be a part of this. So he and his colleagues had to create NOBCHE, or the Black Chemists in Chemical Engineering groups. And so no Black chemist has ever won the Nobel Prize, the highest prize that is awarded. And he had to actually open his chemical company in Mexico to be able to make a derivative of cortisone, which a lot of people use in their older ages as their joints and things go down. He made it available for the masses. And so just to piggyback on what was said about systematic racism, he wasn't able to accomplish all of his dreams, all of his hopes at the same speed as his colleagues because of hurdles. Many times when faculty members are hired on campus, the faculty of color, in particular African-American faculty members, have published less than their colleagues who are hired. Mostly because we are not invited to be a member of the teams of research groups. When you're a member of a team, you can publish many more papers because you're part of a team with a lead, maybe putting that out. And then so that then when we're evaluated, it's looked at, well, you're not as qualified as everyone else because you only have 2 publications. But I did all the work myself. I wasn't part of a team. And so that's kind of goes with the current and against the current. And so I guess I speak from a place of privilege in that because of all the work people have been doing in the country before me, I've been able to have a very good life. But at the same time, when a lot of the things happened to answer your question, Darrell, when the things happened recently with 7 brothers and sisters losing their lives over the summer, I was hurt. And I'm only one of maybe 10 Black faculty on campus. And I struggled just even doing my job. I didn't want to log in. I didn't want to read emails. And people were asking me, can I move my office? I was like, forget your office. I don't care where your office is at. But I had to find a way to keep moving through those emotions. And so imagine your families, like your large family, include grandma, grandpa, cousins. If something happened, think of all the emotions that would come out of the family. They would say, "This is horrible. I didn't see what happened. Tell me what happened. I don't think this is a big problem." I think we experienced a lot of those different emotions where faculty members sent me texts, "I'm so sorry, I'm thinking about you." I was like, well, I'm glad you're finally thinking of some of the things that I've been trying to bring forward from Black Faculty and Staff Association on behalf of the students. Others said, "Can you read my letter?" I was like, I'm still hurting. I'm not in a good place to read your letter yet. But I'm happy to report, at least in the College of Science, that we have a really good group. We have something that we're really growing over here, and we've been spreading it to the rest of campus, in that just as athletics is putting together this committee that's like, let's sit down, let's snuggle up, let's really get deep into some of these things, we're starting to do that too. And just today we had a meeting on when all the faculty come back, we're gonna start with Black Lives Matter. And some of the other chairs like, I'm gonna lead that discussion. And there was fear. There's a lot of things that are going on. I was like, yeah, but we gotta keep doing this. And so we said, some of the comments that came from my colleagues were, but aren't we very diverse? Others said, it's the first day back to campus. You sure we shouldn't be like partying and not bringing everyone down? I said, this is part of many people's everyday lives, including myself. So we got to stand in this. And if we were going to be really serious, we got to stay in it. And I guess the thing I want to say is that it runs the gamut. Some people are scared. Some people are hopeful. Some people are ready to push forward. And I think that's where we really need to partner with the students, in particular on this call, all of you student athletes, in that this is university, and the university moves in the directions that the students want to push. I know, and I'm part of the faculty. I know we think we run it all here and things are amazing, but we serve the students. And many of the things that maybe we'll talk about in a bit, the movement we've seen on some topics, and we will continue to see, it's because students who are right in their development, pushing for their dreams, saying, I'm not going to let this go. And when you push your chairs, your faculty members for more and more excellence, that's where the push comes from. And so I'd say that the faculty and staff on campus are just like members of a larger family with a wide range, but it is the students who are going to continue to push and push us to keep being leaders in this. And I think that's why the university is great. All revolutions start on the university campus, and that's why I'm happy I'm a part of it. And I have security in my employment to be able to stand up and say powerful things, but it's more about supporting the students who want those things to be expressed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Page, for that. And we'll definitely come back to that a little bit more. We had a really good question come down while Ms. Butts was talking. The question is, do you think that school to prison pipeline system is a huge factor in this barrier as far as SAT scores for people of color, and how can we change this trend?
So the question is, do I think that the school to jail pipeline, what was the relationship with testing? Sorry?
Is a huge factor. You had spoke about the systemic racism in the SAT, and you mentioned the school to prison pipeline, and he's asking if this is a barrier to SAT scores and how can that be changed?
So that's a really good question. I'm not familiar with any actual study that looks at the relationship between the two, but I will say this, that we know about elementary education, which is how we create that school to jail pipeline, right? It's based on elementary school. The number of Black boys in elementary school in an area dictates the jails that are created, right? And we know that. We also know—
And I believe their reading level in the 3rd grade is a direct predictor of how many jail cells need to possibly be created to support that pipeline system. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great. And so what that also says to us, the other piece of that is we know that one's zip code impacts their health outcomes, right? So there are health disparities based on zip code alone. So I'm not familiar with, and maybe Dr. Page is, a clear study that connects the school to jail pipeline with the SAT, but I can say that I think it's reasonable to assume that the fact that the education that you're receiving in those schools, I used to be a teacher, so I can attest to the fact that this has been true of my own experience in teaching. The engagement and the commitment of many of the non-minority teachers in minority schools, that's what impacts your SAT scores, right? Because again, how well are you reading? What is the math that they're exposing you to? What's the science that they're exposing you to? So that the education that you're receiving is what's impacting your test scores. But the other thing that impacts the test scores, we know this, is the pre-test training that people receive. That's why institutions like Kaplan are multi-million-dollar institutions, because they're teaching students how to take these tests. So I think there's a relationship in terms of the socioeconomic part, but I don't know of an actual study that has connected school to jail pipeline with the actual SAT test. But I think it's all part of the same systemic inequity. Dr. Page, you want to add anything to that?
And I would just add, just like SAT prep is just like many of the students on this call who play club sports. It's a prep ground where you get time on task and become an expert at what you're doing. And it's now led to maybe partially funding some of your now educational efforts. And then I think because of the understanding of how the test scores are biased because of maybe a lack of preparation, that's why the California schools have now moved away from necessarily requiring SAT for in admission decisions. And there will be something else that will have some sort of maybe inherent bias to it, but I think our colleagues and our administrators are looking and saying, how might we want to have more of a level playing field now?
Yeah, we're starting to look at the holistic review as opposed to just GPA and SAT score.
Sure. Thank you guys a lot. Chief Robinson, don't want you sitting there falling asleep on us.
I am not, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today. The obvious one is, of course, George Floyd and everything that we saw and witnessed around that incident. Many feel the issue of systemic racism is encapsulated in his death. Following the recent events, can you share with us what's your vision of your department and how you're addressing dealing with systemic racism and as you interact with the student body on campus and off campus for that matter?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So let me first start out by giving you a little bit of my history. I actually, I grew up in Covina, California, just over the hill from here, and actually came here and graduated from Cal Poly, I think like you stated earlier. After leaving here, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. After leaving here, I got a job with Pomona Police Department where I worked for 6 years. Then in leaving there, I went to San Bernardino Police Department where I worked for 16 and a half years. And now, fortunate enough to be here as your police chief. So I've had quite the journey going through, an experience in different factions of life. Before George Floyd, I've been a police officer for many years and witnessed a lot of things and good, bad, indifferent, whatever they may be. So I developed my own concept, my own theory of what policing should be. I don't know if most of you have seen me walking around campus, but if you see me walking around campus, 99% of the time I'm wearing my uniform. And I don't wear my uniform other than to be part of the community. I believe that as a police officer, I'm here to serve those who we work for. My job is strictly to provide safety for the community. And I think by being out there in the uniform and by bringing my personality, who I am, to the campus, hopefully students can see beyond the uniform and see me for who I am, which is just another person who was just an athlete, just like most of you on this chat today, that walked around the same classes and everything else. I love being part of the community, which is what I think law enforcement is all about. We are hired by, it's an interesting position we have in law enforcement. We're hired by the community to serve the community. And I think as years go on for many of those within the profession, maybe the views and the aspect change. Whether they started out that way or they ended up changing. And it's our role and my role as a police chief to ensure that those beneath me stay focused on what the mission is and make sure that they police fairly, unbiased, and treat everybody equally. So when we say, like, you know, what is my vision for my police department, you know, my vision started, 4 years ago when I got here. Like I said, part of it was becoming part of the community and building that trust with the community, which is why I wear the uniform. You'll often see me walking around, and I'll walk into classes and speak to individuals and just see what's going on. Or if I see Mike walking across the campus, yell at him and say some nonsense just to keep him entertained. But to take away that stigma from the uniform, because it's very important. I am just a person. And believe it or not, you might find this hard to believe, when I'm not wearing the uniform, I am just a black guy driving around in a car. So I experience whatever everybody else experiences in the world. And I'll tell you, I'll take it a step further. I was actually born in Panama and spoke Spanish till I was 10 years old. So my first language was Spanish. So not only am I a black guy driving around in a car, I'm actually an immigrant, because when I first got here, I was actually possessed a green card and had to become a U.S. citizen to become a police officer. So my experiences are unlike, not as many people because of the different facets that I've had to deal with as well. So having that background allows me to see those around me through a different lens. I can see, of course, people of color, because I, believe it or not, I am one. And beyond that, I can, for immigrants, I can understand that because I stood in that line, and I stood with, down in the federal building, downtown LA. I had to raise my hand and swear to be an American citizen. So I've experienced all of that. So my role now as a police chief is to bring that understanding, that empathy to those who work for me. Because I think we've got a very valuable job. Our job is very important, but just like any other role in the country and the nation, if not done properly, if abused, is a very, very bad thing. And we need to be held accountable for everything we do, every step of the way. Just because we wear this uniform does not make us better than anybody. It does not make us untouchable. We should actually be held to a higher standard than anyone around, because we are supposed to be enforcing the law, not breaking it. I'm going to segue a little bit. You mentioned that, what's been happening in the country and so forth with George. That whole situation was heartbreaking and very sad, especially for most of us in law enforcement. It was more hurtful than most people would believe, because we understand what it's like to have that power, and then to see someone abuse that power, it's detrimental. And to know that, we are all going to be viewed through those lens, it's even more hurtful, So that whole situation was just horrific from the get-go. Now, I can't attest for how training happens in other parts of the country. I can't attest for what happens, but, with other police departments that I have never been a part of. But I can promise you this, for my personal experiences, we make sure and hold everybody accountable, for what they do. And the accountability begins from day one. When it gets to the point to where somebody's doing something like they did with George Floyd, that started years prior. This is just the end result, and it should have been caught by their supervisors, by their managers years before. And somebody failed that entire system. And that's when we start talking about, systemic racism and all the different things. That system is broken. That is a system that needs to be fixed, not just that one individual. Whoever was supposed to be holding them accountable did not do their job. And now it causes this ripple effect throughout. So my vision, I'm sorry, you had a question for me. I'm just going to rant and rave here for a minute and just go on. But you had a question for me. My vision for us here. We've got to be professional. And like I said, you see me wearing a uniform. You'll see our officers all look the same. Their uniforms have been cleaned up and so forth, because, what we do is just got to be just in our actions, but in our appearance. So we hold them accountable to what they do, which is the second portion of what I do. So we've got to be professional. We've got to be legitimate, and to make us legitimate, we've got to hold people accountable. We've got a pretty strict rule on how we discipline and what we discipline over here. We step out of line. We've got, internal affairs investigations, every use of force investigation, and so forth, that by law that we have to take and go through every step to handle situations. And we do discipline, and we do handle those. And then the last thing would be, we have to be progressive. We have to take what's happening in society, and if we're here to serve society, we've got to continue to change with society. My job is to ask the community what it is you need from me. What is it you need from us? And then go out and serve the community in that manner. It is not for us to dictate how things are and pretend as though we are the rule makers, because we're not. We're just here to help enforce what the community wants us to enforce. So in speaking of the changing and so forth, before, a year ago, we at the police department here, we did several things with our parents, making sure our uniforms were all the same, because it was important for me that we're easily identifiable. I wanted the officers and I wanted this community to be proud of who we are. The other part of that was, changing our police cars, making them look a little cleaner to make sure that you could identify who we were. But the last part, which recently we spoke about a year ago, and now it's actually come to fruition, was creating that police engagement team, which I think you saw from the information came out from the president. That was a conversation we had, 6 months, 8 months before any of this, and it was already a progress of what, a team we were talking about creating, and it's now just going to come to fruition. So many of the ideas that I've had and the president's had, Nicole Butts been involved in those conversations, they were already in the works, and I just don't want anybody to feel that it's reactive to what's happening. We truly believe in how we police. We truly believe in taking care of the community, and we truly believe that we are here to serve, and we can make a difference if we police appropriately. I hope that answers your question.
No, that was great. And, that was thorough and great. One of our goals was to bring you in so people can see you for the man that you are as much as for your job. So that was great. We had a question come through. They want to know something very simple. Have you ever experienced racism in all your years as a police officer from other officers?
Absolutely. Let me see. How do I say it without? Yes. We'll just cut through the chase. Absolutely. This profession is very tight knit. I mean, we reach out when it's time to recruit. We reach out into all neighborhoods and try to encourage people to apply, because change really comes from within. The reason, truth be told, the reason I'm in the position I'm in today was because of things that were done to me when I first started out as a police officer, seeing things that were not appropriate. And I knew that the only way I could create that change was to get in that position to affect the change. And every step of the way, I grew into the next rank because I wanted to make a difference. And I wanted to change not necessarily what was happening in the streets, but also among my peers and those who I worked with. You can look at most police departments, the racial inequity, it is what it is. And you can look at all those stats, the FBI puts them out all the time. So our role is, to get in there, and if you want to make the change, get into that position to make the change. And that's why when I speak of this police department, I'm proud of what I think I've done. Hopefully you guys see it the way I do, what I think I've done and where I want to take it, because I saw differently from some of the other departments as I grew through the ranks. Did that answer the question?
Yes, sir, for sure.
And real quick, can I ask the Chief a question real quick, Darrell?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chief, how would you tell our athletes to behave when they're having interactions with police officers? I know the big thing now is, people are a little afraid of the police because that's all you see is the negative things that the police officers do. So how would you tell our student athletes to behave with their interactions with the police, whether it's being pulled over or whatever it may be? How would you tell them to conduct themselves when they're dealing with the police officer?
So the person best to answer this question would probably be my son, because he's heard this preached into him for the last, 22 years on what to do and how to be. So let's be blunt and let's just cut through the chase. When we get pulled over, or when anybody gets pulled over, time of day and so forth, that situation is dictated sometimes by the officer, sometimes it's dictated by the person in the car. People of color, are we viewed differently when we get pulled over? Probably. So I'll tell you what I told Donovan all his life. Oh, sorry, I used his name. I'll tell you what I told one of my kids all his life. When you get pulled over, be respectful, because we don't know who it is we're walking up on. And just like life, you don't know what negative experience or whatever experience that person has had when walking up to that vehicle. So I always told them, hey, look, be respectful, turn around and just say, hey, sir, I'm sorry. Call the person sir, ma'am, or whatever, and then, just go about the business. If that person is being out of line, if that person is doing something rude, that is not the time to be confrontational, because believe it or not, they almost have the upper hand because it's a person with authority and all the different things. What we do is you get down to the station or request a supervisor right then and there. You need other witnesses to make sure somebody is there to see what is happening. My thing's always been be respectful. I'll tell you my personal experiences, you know, and I've told Nicole this before, you know, I've pulled over vehicles where people were intent on killing me. And I walked up to that car, and the scariest thing in my life is to know that they were going to kill me and had to get out of there. For the rest of my career, I have to put that race out of my mind. I have to put those specific individuals out of my mind, because otherwise any vehicle I pull over that looks like that car, it triggers that memory. Does that kind of make sense? It triggers that fear. So when we get pulled over, we have no idea, and I'm speaking as just a person getting pulled over, we have no idea what negative experiences that officer may have. So I try not to play into it. And you could ask anyone who knows me well enough, even when I get pulled over, and believe it or not, I get pulled over when I'm not working. I'd sit back, I've got my hands on the steering wheel, because I know what's scary from the outside. I put my hands on the steering wheel, especially if my windows are tinted. I roll them down and I say, hey, sir, this is what's happening. And I can see, because I've done it long enough, I can see the tension in the officer going down. Now, could that be because I'm an African-American? It could be. Could it be because, you know, wherever I'm at, that person's been, you know, had negative experience in that specific neighborhood? It could be as well. But I try not to give that individual a reason, if that makes sense, because we're all people. And as much training and everything we have, I just don't know what biases they may have that they may not even be aware of. So I just try to be as respectful as possible. Does it make it right? No. This is where, if we want to jump into all the civil unrest we're having and so forth, people are right when they say the policing needs to change. Absolutely. But what is it that needs to change about it? I think, you know, we keep talking about training and stuff. I've been doing this job for 26 and a half years. Yeah, I'd be lying to you if I told you that there are things that didn't happen in my life that did not make me different, you know? And I think as years go on, it's all about the psychology of how the officers deal with it and weeding those who can no longer do the job properly out. You know, we don't get tenure in this profession for that reason, because, you know, I may start out being a great officer and I may have negative experiences that now suddenly change me and make me become somebody else. We need to wean those people out. We need to have processes, checkpoints throughout their career, which is at 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, maybe a secondary psychological evaluation 10 years in or 15 years in, because we take a psychological evaluation, you know, when we first get on, but 25 years later, you can't tell me I'm the same person. You know what I mean? So I think we've got to have checks and balance throughout, you know, and those coupled with your incidents you've been involved in, you know, whether it's been shootings or whatever the case may be, take the psychological evaluation and couple it with those. And I'm sure, Mike, I know you're a scientist, so maybe somebody can come up with a matrix that tells us, hey, by the way, these two things don't go well together. This is not the profession for this individual anymore. That was just Dario's opinion. Sorry.
I was wondering if you were calling me crazy by the number of years I've been a faculty member. I was trying to see where you were going, but
no worries.
No, I really thank you, Chief Robinson, for being very candid with us. I was going to move on, but we have one really, really good question. It says, how do you feel about the police force and the all cops are bad as a Black chief, and what solutions do you see will work in the near future for the police system?
So I think I just addressed some of that, but yes, it hurts, but I see why people do it. Not all of us are those that you see on television, right? But is there a small percentage, or maybe is there a percentage, whatever that percentage is? Absolutely. And I could see why people would, you know, categorize it and say, well, all are bad, because, you know, you don't hear the good stories. We just hear the bad stuff, you know. So like, it does hurt, especially being a Black chief, right? You know, I hear, you know, people holding up Black Lives Matters, and you see throughout the country where they're, you know, even assaulting and spitting on some of the Black officers who are out there just doing their job. And at a certain point, you go, well, does he call in sick for work? Does he not come? Does he now quit the job and cross the picket line? It puts you really in a situation where you have to go back and forth. I'll tell you, Northridge had a protest about a month ago where it was a Black Lives Matter march. So we deployed out there to go assist, and the LAPD was out there. And I tell you, it was the strangest thing though, because I didn't know what to expect. And of course, you know, there was probably about 1,500 students, individual members from the community marching, and we blocked off the streets and everything. And what I found most interesting is in the middle of this protest, and there are Black Lives Matter and defund the police and everything, as I stood, I walked off into the roadway to video as they were coming towards me, because I'm just like that. I wanted to bring it back and show everybody here how it was working. So many people walked out of the protest, walked over to me to hand me water, high-fived me. It started out with, "Hey, man, I just wanted to thank you for being here." Others high-fived me. I mean, one guy came up and said, "Can I just give you a hug?" And as it started, people started cheering as more and more came over to me. I mean, I actually stopped videoing because then it became like I was the focal of attention and people were thanking me. So even though we see that on television, for me anyways, even though we see that all cops are bad on television, that little bit, that day, just renewed my faith in humanity that, okay, it's not straight across the board. Just like people would think about any race, it's not straight across the board. And, I have to hear it, it hurts, but then I have to realize it's not straight across the board. There's really a lot of people out there who truly appreciate still what we do. Because really, I mean, I'll be honest, I mean, and my family knows, we go out there and I'm protecting buildings, I'm protecting people who I've never met before, and I've been shot at and everything else for people that I've never met before. And we do it all the time. They always say, in this profession, I truly know what I'm worth, what my life is worth, because you can look up and see how much I get paid. That's my dollar value right there, because my life could be lost at any time. So I can't remember your question. I'm sorry, Damian. Darrell,
No,
I just kind of ventured off.
No, you answered it. It was good. We're going to table that for a minute. We're going to come back to you on a couple of Q&As. I want to get Damian in here, get a little staff perspective from inside the athletic department. Damian, if you can speak a little bit on what since I'm in it, what we're doing inside the athletic department to, one, address the topic on hand, systemic racism, and two, to connect our student athletes and our department to the greater campus as a whole.
Well, I think it all started with us just doing some self-evaluation of our athletic department. When everything happened, we had a department staff meeting, and a few of us coaches, the Black coaches on the staff, there's 5 of us, met a few days after the meeting and went over some things and to see how we can help our department reach out to our students. And we evaluated ourselves and we didn't think we were doing enough. So what came about that was forming our racial equity subcommittee and kind of giving ourselves a platform to be able to reach our students. And, the first thing we wanted to do is wanted to educate ourselves. You hear systemic racism a lot, but you don't exactly know what it is. So we reached out to somebody on campus, Nicole, and she came and really educated our whole department for about an hour. I think everybody kind of left with their jaw dropped with all the different things that you heard about systemic racism. I mean, you hear about it and you have your self experiences with it, but just hearing all other things that are going on with it, even from just hearing Dr. Page and Nicole speak about, the 3rd grade, reading level being equivalent to the prison beds that are out there was just something that's I haven't heard before. It was kind of jaw dropping for me. So we had to educate ourselves on what systemic racism is and how we now, once we educate ourselves, now how are we going to participate and get everybody to understand what that is and further educate themselves. So that's why next thing we did was have this town hall so we can educate all our student athletes on what's going on and give ourselves a voice. Because without having the education and having knowledge, you can yell and scream all you want, but if you're yelling and screaming about the wrong things, nobody's going to listen to you. You have to be able to educate yourself and know your rights. As the chief mentioned, you're getting pulled over. If I know I haven't done anything wrong, I know I'm not going to let a police officer just treat me any kind of way. I'm going to know my rights. I'm going to understand what's going on, and I'm going to understand how not put myself in bad situations. And that's the biggest thing. Again, being a minority, I know I can do everything right and still get put in a bad situation. But the more I know and the more rights I understand that I have, I'm going to be able to get myself out of that situation at some point. So that's the biggest thing we have to do as student athletes, whether you're on campus, you're off campus, we have to educate you guys on your rights and everything that you need to know and how to handle yourself in certain situations. Now, if you're putting yourself in bad situations all the time, there's not too many people, anything anybody can do for you.
Right.
But if you're doing the right things and you're educating yourself and you know your rights, you're going to be able to know when something's bad about to happen. And if it's something that's systemic and you can make a change for, you got to go out there and speak up and do something about it. Now, I'm not telling everybody you got to go out there and protest and have your picket sign up, because that's not for everybody. But there is something that you can do. You can form petitions. There are different ways to be active and participate in making change. And I think that's what this committee is here for. This committee is about action. There's different avenues we can all go down to make change. You know, Chief Robinson needs to join the police force to make change. Nicole, you know, she's in the Inclusion and Diversity Committee. She's making change. You know, Dr. Page is part of the Black Faculty and Staff Association and leading this faculty. He's making change. And that's at the elected department. We want to educate you guys and give you as many avenues as possible so you can be informed and you can create change. We all are going to take different paths on doing different things. Like, I'm not a big protester getting out there. I'm not the guy. I'm more behind the scenes. I will start petitions. I will go talk to people, but I'm not a protester guy. That's just not me. But we all have our different avenues to try to create change and make change. And that's what our committee is trying to put in front of everybody. And you have to find your own way to be able to do that. But you know, the biggest thing we're going to move forward with next is voting and creating laws and regulations to where we're getting rid of systemic racism. We're putting people in office that are speaking on terms that we want them to speak from. You know, I'm not going to be a guy that's going to be yelling at this politician for doing this, that, and the other when I never went out there and voted for a guy who could have did something else. So we all have to do our part. And again, you got to get off the bench in some way, shape, or form. You know, it's like you being on your team. We all have different roles. You have your scorers, you have your defenders. Everybody plays a role to how to help the team be successful. So we all have to be able to find our role and go out there and do the best we can to help make change.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. We had a question come through.
Can I jump in
go
real
ahead.
quick? I'm sorry. I just wanted to
Yes, you may.
piggyback on the election piece. And I think it's really important for us to recognize the importance of our local elections also, right? We're talking about our presidential election, significantly important, but do not forget about the importance of our local elections, because that's where laws are implemented. That's when sheriffs are elected. That's when our attorney generals, our state attorneys are elected, our judges, and those are the ones who are making decisions about sometimes your life, the life of your family members. So please pay particular attention to your local elections as well. And don't go in there blind and not know who you're going to vote for. Do research on the judges that may be up for election, or the sheriff, and the laws that we're actually looking at. So, sorry.
To talk about that, I remember my first time voting some 20 years ago and going in there, and I'm like, I can vote on judges? Like, yeah, I can vote on sheriffs? Like, you know, I really had to do my you know, everybody thinks about the president, this person's doing a terrible job, but you can vote on so many different things just locally in your community, from propositions, like you say, the judges, to the sheriff. Again, if you think your police department isn't doing a good job in your area, yeah, you can change that. So again, voting, and I think that's going to be our biggest piece as we're coming up with our committee. Is our next thing is this voting and educating ourselves on what our rights are, voting, and the difference in the changes that we can make.
Exactly, and I think it's important to point out to all the student athletes, to the panelists also, is good information, segues in something we'll touch on later. That is specifically one of our workshops coming up about the different levels of voting and what it means and why your vote matters. Don't listen to people that tell you your vote doesn't matter. Your vote matters, but you got to vote and you got to know what you're voting on. Yeah, thanks, Dee. That was great. Specific question, this to Coach Hill. What are the coaches doing within their programs to prevent the use of racist or homophobic slurs on the field or in the locker room? How are they holding those that use them, whether joking or not, accountable?
Well, first thing I will say is I think our athletes are pretty fortunate. Just dealing with all of our coaches in our department, they have been great through all of this stuff. They've come with big ears and big eyes and are listening to everything our committee has come forward with. They're asking a lot of questions. They're being uncomfortable, which is leading to growth with all of us. And the biggest thing, if you hear somebody saying something that's inappropriate within your team, you have to step up, and you either got to go to your captains first. Then if your captains, go to your head coaches. And if not, this is what this racial equity committee is for. This is why we're forming that. I think we're gonna get more into why this committee is formed a little later, but this is why this committee is formed, for those kind of problems and issues that you may have on your team. You need to bring this forward to this committee, and we will go and put it forth to the proper channels. So all of our coaches have been great. I mean, we always do the Title IX, stuff. And again, we're doing more racial stuff as well. But again, like if you hear something that's inappropriate, you have to be able to speak up and stand up for the person that may be going against. Because at some point or another, that's going to turn around. It's going to be you that's going to be getting abused in some way, shape, or form. And you're going to want somebody to have your back in those situations as well. That's what all this stuff is all about. I mean, when you're helping somebody else, next week it's going to be you that's going to be helped.
Can I piggyback on that again? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Page had his unmuted first. Go ahead, Dr. Page.
I was just going to extend it to the classroom, which is the other place I think that we all share as well. And I think in the classroom, depending on how you feel, being able to, again, Damian, as you said, being able to stand up in that moment. I think if something comes up in the classroom, the university is built on students expressing themselves in the classroom. And things can be said that could be to the left, and things that can be said that are to the right. And I think having others who are willing to stand and say, I don't think, did we all hear that correctly? What does that mean? Standing in that moment. And Nicole, you might, that's like bystander. It's giving support to push the will of the class in a positive way. And if it's your faculty member who is saying something, who's teaching the class, you may not feel comfortable confronting them in that moment. And that might lead to a little bit of a strange thing, just as Dario was talking about confronting an officer at the moment. Like, that faculty member might have the upper hand, but all of those faculty members report to a department chair. And that department chair has to listen to you. And there's protocols on how to move forward. And then through the initiatives that Nicole and our new, as Alejandro, I haven't met him yet. I meet him next week. We have new reporting venues. But outside of just regulations, I think this is also where Black faculty and staff may not be, the association may not be on the field or in that locker room. We also represent the coaches that are there with you. But if you need a faculty member or a staff member to stand beside you who have said, I'm going to freely, without pay, stand on the line with you. Just as Dario was saying, he is here to serve. Our organization has said, we're going to stand with students, faculty members, staff who have concerns. We will go with you and assist you in the reporting, assist you in making sure that you have the resources you need, because I know how bad it hurts. And the reason why I said I'll start standing in that is when one of my mentees got a job here at Cal Poly and then was fired from Cal Poly for a reason I didn't think was correct. And he was shattered. Imagine getting fired from your alma mater that gave you your degree and said you're not good enough to work here. Imagine how bad that would rock you. And I said I would never let that happen. And that's why now the e-board, Black faculty and staff, we don't cry every night, but there's a lot of nights I cry. And that's because we want to be there and listen and hear. And so all I'm saying is find your allies, find your support. And I have to do that even on campus with my other individuals who are in my support group. We all have to find it because, and I just have to say, on the day that we celebrated John Lewis's life, and that he wrote an op-ed today in New York Times encouraging young people to keep this going forward. It may not change tomorrow. It may not change the next day. If you listen to President Barack Obama's speech he gave today, this is a movement, and we need you to continue moving. And that means you stand, you say something, you become the support that is the change that we want to eventually have. Just be regular.
Ms. Butts?
Yeah, I basically everything that Dr. Page just said, you know, and one of the things that is important to understand is social norms change because you change them, because you speak up and you say, like Dr. Page just said, did I just hear that right? Like, what was that you just said? Can you help me understand what you were thinking, what you meant by that? We have to be able to call out behavior that we think is inappropriate. We have people here to support us, right? We have the Black Faculty and Staff Association. We have your coaches, the department chairs. We have Inclusive Excellence Committee. We have lots of entities that can support that. But ultimately, in that moment and in that time, you need to stand up for one another. You need to stand up for your teammates. You need to hold other people accountable for their words. And when you do that in that moment and in that space and time, you are actually making a significant impact to changing those social norms. When people are used to being able to say whatever they want to say, now they understand that's not appropriate. You know, and sometimes they really don't understand the impact that they have. And sometimes they doesn't really matter whether they do or they don't. You have a right to say, that's not cool. You have an obligation to stand with your teammates and say, that wasn't cool what you just said to that person. Whether you want to call it an ally, whether you want to call it a bystander, but in that moment, the power is yours. If you wait and try and report it, which you can always do, I'll be real honest with you. If you come and report that someone said something mean and nasty and aggressive, there's not a lot that the university can do about that. It's not, and I'm sorry to say this, it's not discrimination. It's not necessarily harassment. It may be horrible, it may be awful, it's not necessarily unlawful. The power is with you in that moment to say, that's not cool. So.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. You know, each one teach one. And part of the college experience is growing up and learning self-responsibility. One of the hot topics, this would be easy to just throw in Chief Robinson's lap, but I'm actually going to open it up to the panel at this point. Hot topic on the Q&A, defund the police, and what does that mean? Anybody jump in? Well, yeah.
So what are our ideas on what that means?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, when I hear defund the police, I hear a recognition that the community, any community, needs holistic care, right? There are so many different ways in which our communities need support and need care. And I think what has happened in our society is we have made the police department the proxy for all of those different ways in which our community needs care. So when I hear defund the police, I hear the recognition that we need to provide support, services, funding to all of those various entities that can help provide the support that communities need. One example that comes to mind is someone who's having an emotional breakdown, right? And we call the police. There's no one else for us to call right now. But to me, defund the police means maybe the call can actually go to social services, who may be better equipped to deal with emotional breakdowns as opposed to criminal activity. It says to me that we may move some funding into aftercare programs so that students have, or children have a place to go where there's structured interaction and engagement. So I hear defund the police not as a way to, it's not to make the police go away. It's rather to recognize that the community needs holistic care and we need to provide holistic funding for that care.
Can I share a personal story that goes along with this? And so there are like response teams, and some faculty members in the psychology department are part of some of these response teams. And even here at Cal Poly, we have a response team. If a student has insecurities Now as a chair, when I have to report something, let's say that I have a student who has a mental breakdown, is just crying uncontrollably. And we now have a Bronco Cares unit, and I report that because I'm worried for the student. There might be another report with that student around they don't have somewhere to sleep. They don't have any food to eat. There's a lot of things that go into providing care. And so one of my sisters deals with depression and thoughts of suicide. And I from California had to call back to Ohio. I didn't know who to call, so I just called the police department. I said, I can't find my sister, and everybody thinks that something's going wrong. So can you help me? And then I got a call back from she was associated with the police department, but she was also associated with the social worker response team. And she called me back every 4 hours. We found a ping on your sister's cell phone in this area. We found the apartment that she moved to. Next part, we talked to the apartment manager. We've seen her walking, but she doesn't want to talk to us. She kept calling me back, and I was like, man, I got to really change my perspective on what it means to ask for help. And in those response teams, and I know we've all seen it in the news, sometimes when the young brothers and sisters have lost their lives, it's come out that this person was mentally unstable. And so do we interact with them in a different way? And I didn't want my sister to be harmed. And so I was glad there was a response unit that was caring for her in a different way. And so I like to think of it, just me personally, as shared funding, but then as a department chair, I'm like, I need a certain amount of money to be able to do my job for my department too. And so as a leader for my department, if you say something about sharing resources, that's when we really have to collaborate and say, but we still have to teach our classes. We still have to run our instruments. How will we do that and still reach the mission?
Chief Robinson.
I'll jump in. So, yeah, the defunding the police thing, I think like Nicole said, I think it's grown different definitions, right? It's gone everywhere, from defund and abolish the police department to defund and do different things. When I hear defund the police and my interpretation, and I get what people are saying, and I agree that there are so many things that we're responding to that really isn't a law enforcement issue. We are really just law enforcement, and our job is really just to go out and stop criminal behavior from happening. Somehow, many things get tossed into the job description or the purview of law enforcement officers because maybe it's because of the time of the day or just because it's a quicker response, and it's easier to just say, well, let the police go deal with it, and then we'll figure it out. For instance, we'll take, the mentally unstable and those type of calls out of it. If we think about a fire call. Did you know that in certain areas, because there's so many calls for fire, sometimes when if somebody calls 911 and says there's a fire, it's the police department that first rolls out. And while we're rolling there, the fire department's getting ready to go. But we get there and even verify if there's a fire. So they use the police to kind of, get there first and verify while they're coming. And then we cancel them and say, no, it wasn't a fire, it was a popcorn or whatever the case may be. I think it's the same thing happening when we look at society. You're right, Mike, there's no reason for us to be responding to some of those cases where somebody is just mentally unstable or somebody's having a hard time, because it could be as simple as they're crying, they're distraught, they're sad because something tragic just happened in their life. And I don't think that is going to be helped by a uniformed officer showing up and saying, hey, what's your problem? How can I help you? You know what I mean? That's better handled by someone who knows how to handle those situations. Even though we've got some training in it, it's not what we've made our living doing. So when I hear defund the police, it's about reallocating some of the money that goes to the police department and maybe allocating it, just like Nicole stated, maybe we spend some into that team response, that mental health response. One of the cities I worked in, that's what we had. We had a mental health response team. So the officers we still got there first because, of course, we were already out on the streets working. However, the mental health team was responding. And when they got there, sometimes we would get there and we were talking to the person and they would show up, they would talk to them and say, you know what, we can take care of it. And we were gone because it really wasn't a police issue. But some of those things come down to financing. So yeah, maybe taking some of the funding away from police to spend towards those things. But if we go to the extreme where we start speaking about truly defunding the police or abolishing the police. That's a societal decision, at the end of the day. Do I think it's the right decision? Obviously not. But it's a society decision. If people in the community decide that they no longer need law enforcement, let's say we could create an island where everybody got along and there was no need for law enforcement, then absolutely do away with it, because our job really is to serve, right? And if we're no longer needed, why do you spend money on cops if we're just walking around hanging out at the donut shop? You know what I mean? We can spend the money somewhere else. But so if a community feels that we can decrease the amount of officers because we don't need them as much and we can spend somewhere else, I think that's for every community to make. That's a decision for every community to make. And it's got to be city by city, because it really depends on how that city is policed. Not just meaning how the officers do their job, but the necessity behind law enforcement. If we're not needed as much, then absolutely take some of that money away and put it somewhere where it's needed. It's not a have to have law enforcement. It's a need. It's a profession that if you need it, you use it. If you don't, then go ahead. So that's kind of my view on that aspect. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, good. Thank you for sharing. Do you think, we had another question come through, I'm gonna kind of morph it into this. Do you think that a hiring of more minorities will help with the profile of the law enforcement?
Yes and no.
Initially.
Honest to God, yes and no. Remember, we're all humans, and just because of the color of your skin as an officer does not mean that you cannot be jaded moving along through life as well. It's just reality. I really think we have to go back to the mental aspect, the psychological test, and the constant checks and balance on every single person. I think it's a huge start, and that's why I always try to encourage as many, minorities and females to apply to this profession, because you have to have that perspective beginning. But at 10 years, 15 years in, depending on what they've experienced, doesn't matter who they are, they're going to need that help to be able to see things, properly, to make sure that there's a checks and balance, to make sure what they're doing is actually appropriate.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Page.
So we can also ask that question in terms of the university too. Do we need to hire more faculty of color? Do we need to hire more women faculty? Do we need to hire more academic advisors that fall into XYZ categories? And so I think the answer to that is yes, in that when we look at the percents, even at our own campus, I don't feel as though we necessarily mirror the percentages of the state of California population. And since we are a state school, we have students that are across the entire gamut. And is it valuable? Is it necessary that a faculty member be from the same identity as you? No, I think all of them are experts and can teach, but there are certain things that happen along this college journey that at times you might have more of a role model or an opportunity to engage with someone who is similar to your particular background. I think that only enriches our university community. And so that's why Nicole and I actually partner for a couple of years now on looking at how can we look at our hiring practices. However, being in a state that says we can't hire solely on race, we have to look at all of the different criteria. And as Dario was saying, how he was saying that your thinking changes over the years. That means that the hiring committees for coaches, for faculty members, for advisors, for different things have to make sure that we're adjusting to our new social norms and making an informed decision on who we hire. And so I think now leading into a potential pandemic, well, we're in a pandemic, but also maybe an impending budget cut and where we're not hiring as much. This is the time again where the student voice I would love to see more X, Y, or Z in my experience on campus is good feedback, that it can't just be me saying it. It can't just be Nicole saying it. It just can't be Damian saying these things. I think we need the student voice around some of these matters.
We do need that voice, and we do need that involvement. And I agree, we need we need greater representation in our faculty, our staff, not just in hiring, but also in retention and also in promotions. And we need greater representation in our student body. You know, when we look at our student body, it also does not represent the state or even our region, Inland Empire. So we need to increase our representation of the community, the various communities in our faculty, staff, and our student body as well.
Thank you, guys. Chief Robinson. Yeah, I'll go to this one. We got about 15 minutes left. Oh, we got 12 now. Chief Robinson, real quick question came through. It says, many protests have brought into question the use of riot gear by police. Can you share your thoughts on the use of riot gear by police at protests and whether it helps or is more harmful? And how can individuals interact with these officers to ensure a peaceful protest?
Gotcha. So the riot gear, when we start speaking about riot gear, you're looking at helmets and bigger vests and so forth. Most of the things that the officers are wearing, it's really just to protect the officers. I mean, I know they look like, you know, pretty intimidating. You've got on a helmet and a shield and so forth, but a lot of that stuff is really just to protect when objects get thrown at us. I've been in those situations where I've been hit with, you know, you name it, with, you know, bottles with water in them, urine, all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, so it's really to protect us, and that's kind of the most of it. Outside of that, you know, so it looks scary. Most of the stuff they're wearing is to protect them. And then you look at the other things that we bring to the riot or to a protest, like tear gas and pepper spray and all those other things. Those are more to disperse crowds. So you're looking at two different topics almost. So the gear being worn is not really assaultive in itself because it's really just to protect the officer. You know, the helmet's not going to hurt anybody because we're not headbutting anybody. The vests we're wearing, really, they're just heavy. In the event we get shot at, and we put on heavier vests because they take heavier rounds. Like the vest I'm wearing only handles handguns. If somebody was to shoot at us with a rifle, it'd go right through me just like butter. So when you see the heavier vest, is because it handles rifle rounds, like if somebody shoots at us from far. So that's the big stuff that you see. So it looks intimidating, but that's really all just to protect the officer. And then, of course, when you start talking about a baton, the rubber bullets, the gas, and all those other things, those are more to disperse crowds. What was the question?
Do you think that the riot gear is more helpful or harmful in a protest situation? And when an officer is in their riot gear, how can an individual that's protesting peacefully interact with that officer?
So during a peaceful protest, and I've been in lots of protests, I've actually had some where we had opposing sides on both sides, and we kind of stayed in the middle so they wouldn't fight and stuff, because we're really out there just to stop, you know, people from getting hurt. What ends up happening in a lot of protests is, as peaceful as 80, 90, sometimes 99% of the people are, it takes one individual in the middle of the crowd to throw something, right? And another individual to throw something, and before you know it, now the officers are on guard thinking, oh my gosh, they're all assaulting us. I think it's a fine line between a peaceful protest with 90% and the 5% or the 3% or maybe the 1% who may lead it down the wrong path. The biggest control on those things is us as a society. I mean, we've got to embrace protesting. We've got to embrace our rights to go out there and protest. That is our right as Americans. And we've got to embrace it, and we've got to stand tall by it. But we also have to ensure that in the middle of that, we don't have individuals who may not be intent on just peaceful protesting. Now, protesting can go either way, right? It can be peaceful, and sometimes there's a time where protesting is just set on it's going to be violent. You know what I mean? Of course, if we're, you know, whatever the case may be. But if it's a peaceful protest, 99% of the times, you can walk up and speak to somebody on the line. And you can talk to them and go, hey, why are you out here? Because I literally stand there and I've been yelled at and told, hey, you shouldn't be here. And I've had dialogue back and forth. It's just when it becomes violent, when people start assaulting each other. And believe it or not, sometimes even within a peaceful protest, the anger sometimes turns from the police to within themselves, because you will have those who are intent on being peaceful turn into others who don't want to be peaceful and saying, okay, hey, let's not do that. And then you have confrontation. I think what we're experiencing right now, though, is just bad all the way around. You know, you've got police officers out there protecting empty buildings, which doesn't make sense to me, right? I mean, it's an empty building, and now you're turning into a riot situation because you don't want somebody to come over and graffiti the building. At the end of the day, it's just a building. You know, it's just a building, and we're here to serve people. And sadly enough, or honestly enough, those buildings don't belong to the officers. They belong to the community. The people who pay the taxes into the system are the ones who are, you know, that's their building. It's theirs, you know. And we can start out and try to squelch the violence, you know, and just say, hey, you know. But are we sometimes creating the violence by just not letting people be heard and be felt, and you know? So it's a fine line between the two, you know. And I tell people all the time, in law enforcement, we can start riots, you know, all on our own, because we go out there thinking we're going to try to do the right thing and make sure that nobody's going to graffiti this wall. And then you have to ask yourself, did I really just go out there and start defending a wall that somebody was going to spray paint? You know, so it's a fine line, and we really have to walk that line and make sure what we're doing is truly in the best interest of the community. What is our purpose? You know what I mean? And I think sometimes what's happening is we've lost sight of what the true interest is.
Thank you very much. One last question. I will throw this to Ms. Butts. I'm gonna finish with this because it's personal to the campus and to a few individuals, a few student athletes. And so it kind of gives us a segue into something that directly affected everyone. And it's in regards to the red shoe protest. The question was, you guys are familiar because we spoke on it before. If you could speak a little bit upon the issue that occurred following the red shoe protests and the accusations, and what was the outcome of that situation.
So what prompted the situation, and then we can talk a little bit about the outcomes. So what prompted the situation was clearly, and this is, we know this, it's been written about a number of times, was a perception of racial profiling. And the perception of racial profiling and what appeared to be the university's lack of response to that perception of racial profiling is what led to the red shoe protest, right? Because the concern was there was nothing done about it. And I can understand why. I can understand both the perception of the racial profiling as well as the perception of a lack of response from the university. What I can say about the response is this: the university did follow, they did an investigation. And unfortunately, what happens with investigations is the outcome of that investigation is not something that is communicated, because there are privacy issues for all the people involved. So when an investigation takes place, if there is discipline for an individual, that's not information that can be shared with anyone. It is against the law for us to share. It's against employment law for the university to share any discipline that a person may have received. People may be able to interpret or guess around outcomes. They may notice that a person isn't on campus any longer, or they may notice that they're in a different role or in a different building. They may notice some things, but that's not information the campus can share. And it's really, I understand, on the one hand, I want to say it's unfortunate, right? Because it is unfortunate that because it can't be shared, the assumption is that nothing happened. At the same time, it's not unfortunate because we do have an obligation to protect the rights of all people involved, both the person who made the complaint and the person who was complained about. So did that answer the question, or was there more to the question that
No, not at all.
and I'll be honest, that's one of the hardest things about when we have actual investigations, right? Because we want to be able to affect the narrative, right? But we can't affect the narrative without breaking employment law, right? Or confidentiality issues for both parties. So the narrative has to continue along the lines that it already is, even if that narrative may not be what the investigation necessarily reveal. So it's hard, and it's hard. It's hard for students. It's hard for the administration. It's just a difficult situation all the way around. Now, let me say this. Students have not just a right, but an obligation to say when they think something is wrong. So you will not hear the administration say, you will not hear me say, you shouldn't have done that. The Red Shoe protest was within the rights and the obligations of the students who organized it and participated in it. And I'm quite proud of the fact that the students did what they did, right? Again, there's another narrative that we can't necessarily correct, but that's not the point. The point is, when you think something is wrong, you have an obligation to say it, and you're empowered to say it. And this is the place to say it. So bravo to doing the Red Shoe protest. When you have other concerns, if that's the way that you think you need to have your voice heard, you will never get pushback from the administration on doing that. That's your right and your obligation.
Thank you. Dr. Page, 30 seconds.
Sure. I'm also very proud of the students in terms of protesting and standing up. It's just like what we're doing right now around Black Lives Matter and social justice and many of the Supreme Court cases that have come out around identity, DACA. There's so many things that are happening that the college campus is your place to get good at this, I was good at it in college, so this is where I learned and made a lot of mistakes. But I just want to say that Black faculty and staff really stood with the students in this time, and we tried to listen, and we went and visited departments and talked to the faculty, and that some of those protests led to faculty members listening in their meetings. And then that is why the Senate has been working on a resolution around Black Lives Matters and things of those nature. So the regulations on punishment and things, I don't get into that. I just want someone to listen when I was a student and when I'm a faculty member. And so I think it's an exciting time to be a student and to continue educating yourself, because you all are the ones who are really moving this train. So keep it up and keep passing your classes and get A's too. So do that also.
For sure,
Okay.
Definitely. I want to take the time. Thank you. Our time is up. I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time, for talking and sharing, for being candid, open, and honest. I think it was important for our student athletes to hear, some truths about what they've been living through. I want to invite all of the student athletes to know that the committee, the Racial Equity Subcommittee and Working Group, is open to all students. If you are interested in joining the committee, please let your head coaches know. We'll fill you in on the details about how that can and will happen as we go forward. We look for all input from the student athletes and from other faculty members also. We'll cover a lot of topics. Some were asking the questions, and I apologize to those that didn't have the questions answered, but I promise you, over the months, we will answer those questions. This is an ongoing thing. This is a continuous thing. We hope to work with Dr. Page, Ms. Butts, and Chief Dario in the future on many, many topics. You guys gave me some great ideas, but we will definitely be reaching out. So thank everybody for being here, sharing this time with us. Jaja, go ahead and share. You guys, everybody have a good day. Signing off, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to working with you more. Bye-bye.
For sure.